Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. I'm Timour Azhari, joined as always by Benjamin Red. How's it going, Ben?
It's going well. There's a lot of stuff going on.
There certainly is. And this week, we have Jad Ghosn here to talk to us about it. Jad Ghosn is a Lebanese journalist. Hey, Jad, how are you doing?
All is well. Hope you're good too.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on the podcast today, Jad. Thanks so much for making the time for us. There's a whole lot of stuff to talk about, and usually the way that we do our podcast, we talk about the news first, and then we do a deep dive into some issue. I think today, though, we're just going to talk about the news and the politics that all of these issues bring up, and it's going to be more of just a single block for the most part of us going through and trying to analyze what exactly is going on in the country and what are the political reasons for it and the implications of it. Before we get into the actual meat of it, a couple of things that are only slightly removed from politics, but not really, right? Coronavirus, obviously, number one. Yeah. Nobody seems to be talking about this anymore. It's as though the vaccines arrived and Lebanon got immunized from any more surges that could possibly happen, but that is not the case. Very much not the case. Only something like 100,000 doses have been administered so far.
That's less than 2% of the population, just so you know. I mean, it's a tiny amount.
Yeah, I mean, and luckily a lot of that is healthcare workers. Like that is good for fighting corona, but it just, the numbers aren't there to prevent, obviously, any further surge. And so if you go back and you look at the number of new infections per day, right, that top line number, back when we had the surge right after the holidays when authorities opened up, we saw numbers that were 5,000 plus per day or whatever. Then we had the strict lockdown in January and February, and we did the curve was bent, right? And we got down, to 2,000 something per day. Now, if we go though over the past month or so, and look at the average number of new cases per day, 4 weeks ago it was about 2,340 cases per day. 3 weeks ago, 2,700 cases a day. 2 weeks ago, 2,900 cases a day, and the past week, 3,100 cases per day on average. So you can see as the country is opening back up, also the case numbers are rising, and that is extraordinarily concerning because we know, this could be about to take off yet again. And if you look at the health system, everybody's concerned about the hospitals, overcrowding, all of that stuff. Well, did the numbers actually go down in the hospitals? Well, a little bit, but not that much. The ICU numbers went down. They were, mid 900s at their peak, and then it went down to sub 900 at the beginning of March. But now we're back to the mid 900s. And meanwhile, ICU capacity has not increased that much. We're still, something like 5 and 6 beds is still full, ICU beds for COVID. So, this is really, really concerning. Most likely another surge is coming, but this time, will anything happen? Will there be a shutdown? Will, authorities take the appropriate actions? Will the health system be able to cope? Will they be able to scale up capacity like they did the last time in order to avoid the worst case scenario?
It seems difficult, especially that the talk in the country now is there's so much talk of opening up. It seems like we hear almost every day and every week of different businesses, and like the tourism ministry was saying they want to open up pubs and restaurants only at 50%. But come on, we saw how that went in the past. I mean, those kinds of restrictions really aren't sort of abided by, in Lebanon. And so the idea that we would open up further, it's something that health officials completely say, like, we can't do that. We really are in a position now where we can't afford to open up. And the country has been in some form of lockdown for almost 3 months now.
January was when the new lockdown started, right?
Right.
So
yeah,
I think January 8th, the light lockdown, and then the 14th or something, the strict lockdown. But then,
right, yeah. And the head of the Hadidi University Hospital, Dr. Firas Abyad, has been very pessimistic about this. He's basically said we do look like we're in a surge, but he also was very understanding, as Dr. Abyad did. He was like, listen, with the situation in the country today, it's understandable that people are sort of putting the COVID pandemic in the back seat. there was also another bit of news that I think got a lot of attention over the past week or so, and that was this whole social media firestorm about Dr. Sandrine Atallah. Dr. Sandrine is a Lebanese sexologist. She practices at the AUBMC, and she also hosts a weekly podcast and posts videos online. And basically, her whole thing is sexual health and sexual education in a region and in a country where basically it's not taught at schools, and people, as she told me, don't even know what the names of their intimate parts are or what they do. And so Sandrine Atallah, makes these videos and speaks about these things. And Lebanese TV channels kind of caught wind of this, and over the past sort of 10 days have taken to making fun of her videos, and actually ridiculing her to her face on MTV, on the show Gher Kaukab, which aptly means on another planet, hosted by Pierre Rabbat. And so what happened is they basically put on some of her videos, and these are topics that have to be treated with a bit of maturity. Topics such as how to increase arousal and things like that. You have to be a little bit mature to talk about this. They don't have so much maturity apparently on another planet, and so they made fun of the videos, and then Sandrine came on, and then they kind of ridiculed her and objectified her to her face. That you had hosts telling her that her voice is sexy, and that that they shouldn't that she shouldn't speak about these things in the way she's speaking about them. There was huge backlash. Pierre Rabbat later.
God,
yeah. I mean, it makes complete sense when you watch that. It's so uncomfortable. And Lebanon is a country with systemic sexism and a long history of it. I mean, women can't pass on citizenship. The religious courts discriminate against them in everything from child custody to marriage and divorce. So and that's,
try walking down the street.
Exactly. That's not even to talk about the non-systemic sort of discrimination. And so she got a lot of support, and there's a plug here. I did an interview with her, which you can check out. We'll put it in the bio, where she kind of talks about what happens and also talks about the importance of the work she does.
All right, and both of these things are very, very important issues, and they do definitely play into politics. But we're recording this on Sunday. And the Sunday, March 14th, actually, which is a good day to talk about politics.
In Lebanon, yeah.
Absolutely. Given the March 14th protests 16 years ago that ended up seeing the withdrawal of Syrian forces later that year. But what happened yesterday, March 13th, was we saw another steep decline in the lira. And what drove people, and that seems to have driven a lot of people out to the streets. Not a lot. We're not seeing October 17th numbers, but we are, what happened yesterday was definitely something new, was definitely something significant as well. And so I think we have to go back and try to figure out exactly what's going on with this, what's going on with the economic situation, and how that plays into the politics and the different political games that are being played by the politicians right now.
Right. Over the past 10 days or so, we've seen this return to the streets in a way. And we've seen it, yes, it's smaller numbers, but sort of high efficacy. We've seen road closures across the country, people pushed to the streets by this combination of sort of political deadlock, this feeling of incredible stasis, like we're not going anywhere, at the same time as everything seems to be falling apart. And so there's been a lot of questions raised about why people are back in the streets. Is it parties that are doing this? Is it the Amal movement? And is it the Lebanese forces? Or, other questions about why very small numbers of protesters have been able to hold on to the streets, right? Given that in the past it was much larger numbers and security forces pushed them back. And I'd love to bring you in here, Jad, and pose this question to you of what do you think is actually happening here today? We're obviously in a political crisis, a socio-economic crisis, crisis upon crisis upon crisis. Why are we seeing this movement on the streets now? And what does it tell us about the country at this moment?
So there are lots of legitimate reasons for the protest to happen because, the devaluation of the lira is now at catastrophic levels, and with the implication of the lockdowns and the coronavirus repercussions, also these aggravate the social impact of the problem. But I'm not sure if the symbolism of just catching up with the number of 10,000 liras for each dollar just sparked some anger in the streets. or there are some political players other than the just pure anger of the population that have some stake in the game, like the Lebanese forces or other players. I don't concern myself much with this question because it's the stigma that the ruling class just tried to put on the demonstrations from October 17th, that there are some background deals going on, or some players that we don't know about trying to push the people to the street with some hidden agenda. Because you don't have to do this, because the ruling class haven't done anything since, let's say, September 2019. The beginning of the devaluation of the lira. So you have to expect that chaos will ensue at the end.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, people have a legitimate reason to go out and protest, regardless of any sort of outside intervention or anybody encouraging them to. I mean, if you see your money get locked up in the bank and like the real value of your wages nosediving, that's not to mention harder to get drugs for, yourself or your family members. Yeah. You have a real reason. The things that allow you to live a normal life, like with peace of mind, allowing you to take care of yourself and those close to you, that is slipping away. It's vanishing away. You've got a reason to go out and protest if you're in this position, unless you're one of these, ultra wealthy people, right? So, and so I sort of agree with you, Jad. Like the question of, is this some sort of manipulation? That's beside the point, because the fundamental issue here is that the country has gone off the rails.
There was a question, there was a sense maybe a year ago now, because the protests were so long ago, that politics was in the hands of the people, at least for a short while. And I wonder how you see it now, Jad, with all this talk of, political deals in the background, with what we saw at Kirki, with this rallying of Christian sort of sentiment around, Lebanon's independence and Lebanon's neutrality. And at the same time, you have, pushing and pulling from various sides. I wonder, when you see what's happening on the streets, and to what extent do you see it as actually something that can influence and change politics, or rather as a result of the politics?
Yeah, I'm not optimistic about the streets anymore, because at the end, we just have to wake up to the idea that marching in the streets or having demonstrations are just means to an end. My point of frustration a year and a half now, after this whole collapse began, is that we don't have political forces that have just grabbed the initiative to be able to mobilize the streets for a certain end. So now we see some sort of reactions, angry reactions, definitely, about what's going on in the country. But to what end? Yes, we can demonstrate our anger. That's totally understandable, and it's right. But for what end? That's my problem. And here I see the traditional political class with the patriarch or other religious figures just getting more and more without any fear of any feeling of fear from any repercussion like they had a year and a half ago. So now I see the initiative is in the hand of the traditional political parties and the ruling class we know, and not in the hands of the opposition, even though we have all the reasons in the world to have like a paradigm shift and a shift in the balance of power towards another end. But that's the chaos of the opposition also.
Right.
But I mean, there are concerns though for these elite, right? Because they can see that, they're not blind, they're not stupid. They know exactly what is going on. For instance, we saw this week the army commander came out and gave a very, very stark warning, saying, soldiers are starving just like other people, which is you have to do a double take almost. Wait, did he really just say that? And also we had
Mohammed Fahmy,
right?
The interior minister, come out, which was, even more remarkable. The same guy who live on air said that he had killed 2 people without any context, came back on air and basically said that the security situation in the country has broken down. And he also said, quote, Lebanon is open to all possibilities, not just assassinations, God knows what. And
something you would expect from an analyst, not from a minister.
Right. Exactly. And this is the man in charge of security telling you, hey, man, there's no more security. And I mean, again, how do you read these comments? You know, when you have the army commander coming out and saying this, and the interior minister coming out and saying this, and basically saying, you know, we, these supposed pillars of the state, no longer can uphold the state and do our jobs. Yani, is it pressure or is it reality? How do you read these comments? Are they trying to exert pressure on the politicians, or is it in a way paving the way to lawlessness, which some people fear? I mean, if you have the interior minister saying, you know, hey, I basically can't do anything about security breaches, then if you are anyone from a robber to an assassin, you kind of take that as a carte blanche, no?
Maybe, yes, one can say so. But what I take from these kind of speeches or whatever that these officials are saying now is a reflection of their fears, because the political class in Lebanon, you can say anything about it, but you can't say that they are a bunch of stupid people. They are not stupid. They know the country well. So they know now that after a year and a half of a free fall, with all the social repercussions that we are living in, they know that their biggest fear right now is the security status of the country. Where are we heading, especially in a country where we have some bad memories of a long-lasting civil war? So now with the social collapse going on, the security officials in the country are just like sounding the bells that we are going into a direction where we cannot order our troops to keep the security on the streets. So here you can see that usually our political class isn't so quick to react with any social demands. But 2 days after the army commander's speech about the whole social situation and its impact on the army, you know, Ali Hassan Khalil and his draft law with the 1 million lira raise. So that was quite quick. So now you can understand how fearful they are from this specific situation relating to the security forces.
Right. And I mean, I just wonder, though, is it, you know, like Ali Hassan Khalil's proposal, this 1 million lira for, I think it's 135,000 members of all the security forces in total, you know, from parliament police to ISF to army. I mean, that just doesn't seem very realistic because you're printing somewhere like 800 billion Lebanese pounds for that. You know, and so it sort of seems it seems to be in the sphere of what you would call politics or or populism in a way. And what struck me from Joseph Aoun's speech is it also seemed, you know, a little bit. I mean, the fact that it was broadcast live, you don't see this kind of imagery from the army usually. They release like these short statements. So to have the army commander come out and say this publicly, I wonder, you know, is the fear real and they are reacting to it, or is that also part of this politics? Is this, can we consider them part and parcel of this political establishment, or are they in a way outside, and are they actually scared in a way of, you know, what's happening? And maybe those things are not mutually exclusive, but I wonder to what extent they're playing in the same court, or they're in different courts.
Well, you reach a point you don't know the fine line between populism or mere stupidity, because populism is part of the game in Lebanon. You know, if you remember 2017, I don't know how to call it in English, but the سلسلة الرتب والرواتب.
The salary scale, the increasing the salaries of public sector employees. Yeah.
Yes. So that was a strike of craziness, because the numbers didn't add up and they knew it, but they had an election 6 months after that. So they nevertheless just put it into law. So now you don't know if Ali Hassan Khalil knows what he's talking about, or he's just playing populist politics. It can go both ways. But the more interesting point is what you spoke about, the broadcasting of the army commander's speech live on TV. Yes, that's not natural in Lebanon. We don't do this usually. But what's fearful here is that it marks maybe a shift in the nature of the political system we live in towards a more expanded role for the security forces, just to be able to break down any opposition in the streets, because they are just admitting that we don't have any political solution for the time being.
Yeah, and that is something, you know, a takeover by the army or something like that, which is the extreme version of that, right? That's something that is not without popular support. there are a lot of people who actually think the politicians have fucked up. Time to just like make it a military dictatorship for a limited amount of time to just get things together.
Right.
I mean, that's how, rotten the state is, that a significant portion of the population thinks, give us a military dictatorship.
And you can't help yourself with all of the excellent experiences in our neighboring countries to just import such experience again. That would be catastrophic.
Right. It's what a protester told me early on in the days of the protest. He's like, oh, so they're talking about a temporary military takeover. Look at our region, man. There's no such thing as a temporary military takeover. Once they're in, they're in. And there are reasons in Lebanon why it's a bit sort of more difficult for the army to take over. We do have another, major force that has arms that sort of rival the army's arms. But it is attractive to sort of, look at this situation and be like, yeah, let's Ritz-Carlton these people, right? Like the Saudi Ritz affair. Let's take all these politicians, throw them in a place together, try them, and let's move on forward. But there are various reasons why that's not possible. I think it's interesting when we speak about, this proposal by the former finance minister, who should know his numbers. The former finance minister, this million lira for each person. We had this week the approval in parliament of a social safety net, right? It's a $246 million World Bank loan. And what this would do is $200 million of that would be direct cash distribution to about 150,000 families. And basically, they get up to 800,000 Lebanese pounds per month. It's 200,000 pounds per household, and then 100,000 pounds extra for each family member you have. That's capped at 6 family members. And so this is quite a massive thing, right? You're talking about up to 800,000 people when you speak of 150,000 households. This would also support the education of students aged 13 to 15. It would provide aid to 87,000 students. And basically that's to stop people dropping out of school, because the economic conditions in the country mean that a lot of people have been dropping out to work. You have child labor increasing to a large extent as families find that they need, basically to expand their sources of income. And the whole idea of this World Bank loan is to cut extreme poverty in the country from 22%, where it stands today, according to World Bank estimates, to under 10%. So that's a massive impact, right? For the lives of people in this country. That is a huge change. But we did the devil is in the details here, right? And what we did see is that out of this massive $250 million loan, the MPs and in concert with the government cut funding a few $1 million for oversight of a third-party oversight, basically, of the way these funds are dispersed. They cut funding for an external audit, and they limited the scope from just 1 year, from 3 years. And they also, importantly, cut a contract to hire companies to verify that all of these families who are getting the funds actually A, need it, and B, applied to the criteria and go through a transparent process. And instead, they handed that process to the Social Affairs Ministry, which there are serious governance questions about the Social Affairs Ministry. And so what seems to have happened here is that we have a massive, we have an amount of money coming in that really could support a large part of the population, the most poor people in the population. And what MPs have done, in concert again with the government, because this was approved by the government and referred back to Parliament, is they removed the funding for the oversight. So in a situation, today where you have this complete political deadlock, where we feel like we're drifting nowhere, and if anywhere, we're drifting under, you have this money coming in that is now going to be spent in a way, if the World Bank allows that to happen, it's going to be spent in a way which allows potentially for it to be handed out through clientelism and other means to people who are close to political parties, thereby perhaps sustaining that political system.
And this is a concern that a lot of activists and researchers have pointed out even before Friday's Parliament session, when the politicians actually did something and passed something, right? These words were there. We did an episode a few episodes back on the podcast with Semi Zagheb about this World Bank loan. Go back and take a listen to that if you haven't. It's really interesting because, you say, the politicians aren't doing anything. Well, no, on Friday, they just passed this really big thing that's going to lift, 160,000 families out of poverty, which is huge. That's great. The politicians are doing something. But then what you explain about the devil in the details there, oh no, That's right. It's entirely possible that this oversight was cut for a specific reason, not just to increase the number of families that get aid at the end of the day. And then there's also a secondary reason as well, right? This is a huge amount of dollars coming into the country when the country is very deeply in the red. The financial system, owes billions and billions and billions of dollars that it does not have, US dollars that it does not have. This $246 million, if it happens, will go to the central bank. Then the state will be able to use it as it sees fit, while giving out just, printing lira to give out to the actual recipients.
Right.
And at a rate lower than the market rate.
As it stands today, that rate, 6,240 lira, is pretty much half the market rate. So you're looking at about a 50% discount there on what the people actually get versus the money that's coming in.
Right. So is the World Bank just basically helping prop up the current political and financial system?
In its worst case, if they do approve this, right? Because the World Bank has to approve these amendments. And they were not approved by the World Bank. And what's amazing, just a small note here about the way politics is done in this country. When the government referred this back to Parliament, these amendments, they said that they had gotten the approval of the World Bank. It's clear that they didn't. And that was raised during the session. And that's also something that I confirmed independently. And so now we're in a situation where if they do approve this, it raises a lot of questions, but there is potential that they won't approve it because of these amendments. And these are conditions for disbursement of the funds. And so it's a bad situation where the politics could even prevent this money from getting to the people.
But we saw this not exact same situation, but a very similar situation play out over the past month regarding vaccines between the Lebanese politicians and the World Bank. Essentially, Lebanese politicians saying, you need to give us this, if you don't give Lebanon the vaccines, or now we have this $246 million for impoverished people, you're not punishing us, you're punishing the people. Yeah. And I am sure that the people at the World Bank, the people in DC, they understand this very, very well, that what can you do if you're in their position? Are you going to punish the people because of the bad behavior of the politicians? That hasn't worked out very well historically.
There is also another point concerning the World Bank and the $246 million loan for the extreme poverty, which is that, first of all, I have my own objections on such kind of programs, because these kind of programs don't usually fix the problem. They just give more time for the government to do something, while at the same time having a problem momentarily solved, let's say. But the bigger devil, which is not only in the details that you just spoke of, is that this 800 liras for a family of 6, which is the highest number that a family can get from this program, will get crushed through the hyperinflation that we are seeing. So it's a program with not a big shelf life. So if it doesn't get approved right away within an economic plan and the monetary plan to just stabilize to a certain extent the situation, the amount of this help will just get lost.
Definitely. And this was actually supposed to be, so negotiations for this began in April 2020, when Hassan Diab's government came to power. The social safety net, if you recall, it was part of the government plan. They were talking about an IMF program with reforms and a certain austerity, and the social safety net is it's the safety net. It's the last thing, right? That's supposed to catch the people.
Back then,
but none of the other things happened.
Yeah. And the exchange rate back then was about less than 4,000 liras for a dollar. Now it's times 3.
Yeah, I mean, and so they've said that the exchange rate is able to shift, but it always will be under the market rate, and that's according to the way it's been laid out in the loan.
Well, essentially, it's up to Riyadh Salimi, right? Because it's based fundamentally, it's like a factor of 1.5 or something times the whatever bank rate, which is 3,900. It's set by BDL, and so it seems to be completely at the discretion of Lebanese authorities whether they alter this rate in the future.
But a note here that if the rate gets fixed somehow and the number is not 6,240, I guess, it's now, let's say, 10,000 liras for the dollar. We don't have a larger amount of aid. You have more families getting aid. So the twist here is that whatever you do, 800,000 liras is part of the program as the maximum or ceiling of aids given. But then if you have a bigger share of liras, definitely you'd have more families that would get some aid.
Right. And I wonder, you raised the point about, that you don't like these kinds of programs because they basically kick the can down the road. What but it's such a dilemma because people need this. And you're faced with the situation where, politicians don't look like they're going to do anything. So what do you do in this situation? I mean, do you just, if you're the World Bank, can you basically say, listen, no, we're not going to give you this until you pass reforms? Or do you, appeal, is your human instincts sort of win out there and you say, listen, people need to live in the end? I mean, I wonder how you approach that dilemma, Jad.
Well, I don't speak about these issues from the perspective of the World Bank. I understand totally what the World Bank does and how the bank just engages such humanitarian problems. I just try to see it from the perspective of the Lebanese government. You don't just go to just kick the can down the road, like you said. You have to have such programs as part of a program, of an economic program, to help you socially get through this transitional phase, definitely. But you should have a priority with the World Bank specifically, trying to get some financing for safety net programs with some sustainability, like having, some free hospitalization for most Lebanese, social security, or in terms of education, free education, in terms of university, just to lower the cost on the population in a more sustainable program that would go further than just a year or two. It would be part of your economic system that you are rebuilding. We don't have this now, so we're just gaining some time by feeding people who are in need, and they should be fed and they should be taken care of, but with no horizon at the end.
Right. All of these are band-aid solutions, right? They're all treating the symptoms and not the fundamental causes of the problems. And that seems to be the strategy. Like, let's use like these international actors, whether that is, the World Bank and everything, or maybe like some deal with the Iraqi authorities to get oil for electricity. We will lean on their goodwill in order to put a band-aid over this, but we're not going to actually solve the problem.
Otherwise known as begging.
Yeah, but this would take us back to the idea of the what we labeled, quote unquote, the army takeover. It's not an army takeover, definitely. But what's happening is when you are gaining time through these band-aid solutions, you would need some sort of a strong security apparatus who would just help you in gaining time, quieting down any opposition. And this in Lebanon cannot be done by the army alone. Definitely we have Hezbollah, and we have this whole issue with the not having monopoly over the handling of the army. Yeah. So now, if we put it into a regional context, you can see that someone is betting on the American-Iranian deal to take place with some sort of army Hezbollah cooperation to reach a certain phase, a certain era, maybe a year after now, where this deal is done. From now till then, a certain cooperation between all of the political parties in Lebanon. We know that our political parties are armed, definitely not as much as the army or Hezbollah, but they have to do some sort of taking down any opposition from now till a year. And this band-aid solution will also help in quieting down any social unrest.
Yeah, and speaking of, potential social unrest, I mean, in the same week that we had the man in charge of security saying, hey, there's no more security, we had the man in charge of electricity and energy saying, hey, there might be no more electricity. And it was quite an amazing scene. The outgoing energy minister, Raymond Rajar, he went up to the presidential palace with Nada Bustani, the former energy minister, spoke with Aoun, and then gave the statement where he said, by the end of the month, if we do not get a cash advance for $1 billion to buy fuel, there will be electricity. And he goes on to say, can you imagine in the 21st century that Lebanon is a country without electricity, and this would be so bad for the economy? And he basically stands there for a minute telling the Lebanese people, almost lecturing the Lebanese people about, hey, can you imagine not having electricity? And I'm sitting there going like, yes. We've sort of lived with this for a very long time. The question there almost becomes like, yes, we can imagine this, but can you, Mr. Rajar, sort of digest the fact that you and the party that appointed you have headed this ministry for over a decade and haven't got electricity? And so the issue here is basically that the energy minister says that, if we don't buy fuel, there will be no electricity by the end of the month. He described it as, quote, potential total darkness. And the reason here is that Lebanon's energy system is really stupid. It's basically running old power plants and new power plants on heavy fuel oil, which is extremely pollutant, inefficient, and super expensive compared to other sources of fuel. We literally have to
subsidize.
And subsidized, right? And so it's carted in every regularly on barges and then offloaded and then burnt in these power plants. And if we don't buy the fuel, then no electricity. And so now we're in a position where we need, as has happened many times before, another cash transfer from the government to the Électricité du Liban to buy some fuel. And this happens over and over. And what happens every time is that the Lebanese people are given two options. Settle for this unsustainable, crappy, expensive solution, or darkness. And you're always gonna choose whatever it is other than darkness. And I think the important point here that was made by Jessica Obaid, an energy analyst who we've also had on the show before, is that politicians know that if they let the country fall into darkness, then their time might be really limited. Can you imagine if the country falls into darkness and like hospitals can no longer run, you have massive amounts of produce going to waste? It really might spell sort of the end, or at least a serious period of rioting and sort of chaos in a way. And so they will do whatever they have to do to get that money for the fuel, no matter in what form it is. Even if we have to live through some days of darkness, even if your life is hard for a bit, the point that she made is they will dip into the last dollar of the central bank reserves to pay for that fuel, because it is one of the things that it's sort of the last barrier keeping them in power.
But in the meantime, I think that it's very interesting the way that this has been turned into a hot button political issue. There's actually a political fight over this, which ties into cabinet formation and everything else, because essentially you have on the one side, you mentioned Rajar and Aoun and Bustani and all these people, the FPM. On the one side saying we need the full, $1 billion advance for EDL. This is a legal issue. Parliament needs to pass this, right? So it comes down to politics. And so the FPM is saying, let's do this. Let's do business as normal. At least we'll be able to keep the lights on, all of this stuff. On the other side, though, which by the way, there's a very good argument for that. We don't want darkness, right? So let's do this instead.
You do want power, yeah.
On the other side, you see a constellation of the other parties saying, no. These are potentially some of the last dollars coming out of the BDL reserves that we have left. We cannot afford to just throw them away on EDL yet again. We actually need real reforms this time. And so you see them actually, politicians linking the issue to cabinet formation, because in order to conduct these reforms, you need a new government. You need an actual government. A caretaker government is not supposed to do reforms. And so essentially you have FPM versus everybody else. And this becomes this new major issue regarding the formation of a new government, which has been, going on for, it's been 217 days since Diab's government fall as of Monday, 143 days since Hariri was designated, October till now, when Hariri was designated till now. Hariri and Aoun, the two men who have to agree on this, on a new government, they seem worlds apart.
Yeah.
And now, not only is there this argument over who gets what portfolio, does the FPM get a blocking third or not, but also you have this added on, we're going to throw electricity into the mix, which I understand the argument of we only have a few dollars left. We need to spend them correctly. Now is the time to do reforms.
Yeah.
But linking it in this way to cabinet formation, do you really want to do that?
But you have to remember that this government was labeled that it's the 6 months mission government. Just we have to make some quick reforms. So it's just a transitional government for 6 months. Now we have maybe 7 months in the fall of the Diab's government.
I wonder what you make of the situation today, Jad, where you have basically Hariri saying, these are my demands and I will not, stand down. Aoun basically saying the same thing. But then in the foreground, you have Hassan Diab's resigned government, which is basically taking all the punches, right? They are the punching bag. And you have the politicians kind of in the background playing their game in a way, a game that seems to have fallen apart as it has many times in the past. I wonder how you just see this, the situation in terms of the, this political game, for lack of a better word, that is being played out today at the cost of the people.
Well, since they define politics for the foreseeable future as just a power struggle to just stay in government, waiting for any regional political solution to have its reflection on Lebanon, and then they'll see what they'll do. So I can't see no one besides Hezbollah who has any interest in forming the government, because Hezbollah, yes, is waiting for the Iranians to have any deal with the US to just clarify the power sharing in the region and Lebanon, and thus Hezbollah's role. So they need a government because they need to wait, and they need someone to help in quieting down the social unrest without having any solution to the root causes of our problem. So that's a difficult task. So they need the government. But I can't see how Hariri needs the government when he knows that being prime minister for the next year at least is the worst task that can be handed to any politician, because the collapse will just be harder and harder socially. And at the same time, I can't see Michel Aoun and Gibran Bassil having so much interest in having Hariri as the head of a government, in a government that can stay in power long after the end of next year, even if they postpone the parliamentary election, which is an option, and if they postpone the presidential elections, so it's an option. So I can't see, politically speaking, in the power struggle definition of politics, how this government is beneficial to anyone, especially since they don't have any political programs to solve the issues. They are just trying to cling to power, waiting to see how the regional contest will end up.
Right, and so it's easy to kind of get bogged in the severe hopelessness of now, and many people, I think, do place some kind of hope, or at least look towards parliamentary elections in 2022 with sort of at least a bit of anticipation. But what you seem to be saying, and I think I've heard you speaking about this on other platforms, is that given the context today and the history of this country, where we had elections postponed, from 2013 until 2018, that might not happen. And I wonder, first of all, your take on that. Do you think that in the current context, when you speak of like a regional deal, these things are fundamentally undemocratic. These are things that are hatched out in back rooms, right? And elections almost is an inconvenience when you're doing these kinds of deals. So do you think elections in the current context are viable, that they would happen? And if they don't, I mean, where does that leave us? Because for many people, I think that the last, the valve, the safety valve is like, okay, maybe we have elections, but if we don't have elections, I might blow, because like, what is the outlet? Where is the hope? Where is the possibility to change if you don't have elections?
Yeah, but if you put it into context, you see that, let's say since the 17th of October 2019 and the beginning of the big demonstration of the uprising, you would say that maybe 6 months after it, if I were one of these political parties, traditional political parties in Lebanon in power, I would go for an election, because I know that I have the financial resources, I have the government, and I have big chunks of the population that are still siding on my side. So I can win elections. So you would ask yourself, why didn't they do an election just to get rid of all of the legitimacy of the uprising? Because then you would have a new people who are elected in power, which might be the same people that we have now. Why didn't they do this? Because their internal problems wouldn't let them go that far, because such an election would shift the majority from the 8th of March of Hezbollah specifically probably to the 14th of March,
Right.
because Hezbollah is being now in the forefront of the last 3 or 4 years of government, having Michel Aoun as the president, who's an ally, and having more and more bigger roles in politics in Lebanon. So if that's the case, the problem would be that, yes, they can do an election, but they won't do it because it might shift the power sharing status quo in a big way.
Right.
So the problem would be, what would they do in 2022? Specifically, maybe a year, 14th month from now. So what would they do? Can they postpone the election and face a political dilemma with no horizon? Because an election at least is a closure. Or they go further and further into power politics, waiting for the election to be a reflection of the regional and non-democratic, as you said, solution. So they would have an electoral law that would favor some people over the others to reflect the new balance of power. I believe their past experiences would point us to the latter option, not the first one.
The settlement before the elections, as we're used to, right? You know, we get this many times. Even when Aoun was elected, you kind of know the result of the vote before it happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested though, because I mean, we're recording this, as we said, on March 14th, and the way I see things, at very least, you know, you have March 8th versus March 14th, you know, the paradigm through which all Lebanese politics has been analyzed for, you know, since 2005. But within these coalitions, like we see a lot of fraying ties. So especially, you know, but I mean, first off, it's been, you know, long-standing problems between obviously the FPM and Amal, right, in the March 8th coalition, and now we're seeing problems between the FPM and Hezbollah, like the two big bulwarks there, and so we have an issue there with Nabi Berri kind of siding a bit more with some of his other allies who are traditionally called March 14th. Does the March 14th, March 8th division make as much sense as an analytical framework these days? Or are things dissolving in such a way? Is there sort of a reconfiguration of the constellation that when we're talking about what's going to happen in 2022, or even what's going to happen with government formation? Do we need to be, I don't know, thinking more broadly about this, Jad? I wonder what your thoughts are.
And also, just where does October 17th play into
that,
right?
Yeah,
you have the March 8th, March 14th, and October 17th, which is sort of a new dynamic in that.
Well, I have an opinion about the matter. I hope I don't get a long answer, because I'm interested in the subject for a couple of weeks now, and I have reached a personal conclusion, which says that the narrative of 8th and 14th of March is one narrative, not two narratives, because this division feeds on itself, because it's rooted in a black and white perception of politics, but it goes both ways. So some of the people, so let's make it simple. So if now Jean Block, let's say, says something bad about Gibran Bassil, he would be giving Gibran a service, because the confessional base of Gibran Bassil is being blamed by another confession. So they both gain from such a narrative, such a dynamic. And I believe the 14th and 8th of March is one narrative, because they both gain from such a division. My problem with it is that now the traditional political parties we have in Lebanon, they are trying to reinvigorate this narrative again, for it to dominate the new challenges that were brought up after the financial collapse. So they are trying to regroup people by meddling with fear, definitely, and trying to tap on the bad, let's say, or bloody historical experiences that we had in this country, to just regroup people confessionally and on the basis of the 8th and 14th of March. This is a Gramscian take maybe on the issue, how the powerless consent to be dominated by those in positions of power. That's the way, because this narrative created the common sense for the Lebanese that politics is perceived this way, and we can see that now this interrelated relationship between being economically dominated or lower class and subordinated at the same time to those in power. So what's the relation between this narrative that they are trying to reinvigorate with the 17th of March, 17th of October movement? I believe it's an antagonistic relationship, because in terms of conceptualizing the idea of the two events, it's clearly the opposite. The 14th of March was the date that we have remembrance to for getting the Syrians out of Lebanon, right? So definitely it was during April, but that movement just wanted the Syrians to go out. So that date signifies a conceptualization of politics in Lebanon that our problems come from abroad. It's the Syrians' problem. Once they go out, we can rule our country and we can have a better society and a better country. The 17th of October movement as an idea is that no, our problem comes from within. It's not from abroad. It's not from the Syrians. It's not from the Americans. It's not from the Iranians. They definitely make our problems harder, but our problem is within our own political system that needs to change. That's why the narratives of the 8th and 14th of March trying to dominate the picture now to stop the 17th of October movement from getting this idea rooted in the political culture in Lebanon. No, the problem isn't within our political system. It's just with the other. That's my take. It's a long answer.
No, that's I mean, a very interesting take, because it gets into sort of vertical versus horizontal divides, right? I mean, it's like March 14th and March 8th are on two opposite ends, whereas October 17th seemed to be more of a top down, right? I think that's how you described it, Ben.
Right.
It's a sort of more,
Yeah, I'm curious though, Jad, like under this analysis though, can the FPM really afford to reinvigorate its March 8th ties though, right? Because if they are unable to, and definitely we have seen pressure coming from the FPM base that, we are not happy with the deal with Hezbollah. We are not happy with the way things have gone. Can Gibran Bassil really afford to go all in with Hezbollah and Amal in a reinvigoration of the March 8th movement?
Yeah, was you saying that, let's say that most parties in Lebanon are hit hard by the crisis, definitely in terms of their allegiances and their legitimacy towards their bases. They all have their own problems. Now, definitely the FPM specifically, and let's say Hariri, Gibran Bassil and Saad Hariri are facing the biggest problems, because their political parties are dwindling and they have some organizational issues. How would Gibran deal with this issue is a question, because now to reinvigorate the 8th of March versus the 14th of March division would mean that they would have to be second-tier allies to Hezbollah with no say, no real say in how politics in the foreseeable future will be dealt with. If they don't, and they want to cling to their efforts for the last 5 to 6 years that they want to be playing power politics with both sides to just gain as much as possible from both the 14th and the 8th of March basis, there is a real risk that they will be crushed, because there is no third way, third path for the confessional narrative to go through. The only third path is just change of the political system. Would they go that far? Till now, they are just going back and forth in like a suicidal trajectory, with trying to put a foot in each of these camps, which usually ends bad.
Certainly, it seems like it's backfired. I think there was this idea that almost they felt that they were smarter than everyone else and they could play on both sides, right? And that has sort of ended in a drastically bad way for Gibran Bassil at this point, with, sanctions and sort of all his relationships falling apart.
And with Hariri, like he's taken such a massive hit, first off, because, he was prime minister for so long and didn't really, wasn't able to get a lot of things done, and didn't get the things that were promised to him out of this deal with the FPM that he made. But now he's viewed as sort of like this, he's somebody who can work both with the West and with Hezbollah, right?
Yeah.
And so he has these feet in both camps, but at what cost? At a cost to his reputation, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be continuing to watch this sort of disintegration / reconstitution of the Lebanese political system. We're very happy to have had you on, Jad. Really, we could have, I think, spoken to you for several hours, but we do have to wrap up.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for bearing my weak English. I'm working on it.
No,
I mean,
not at all. It's not weak at all. I mean, come on, you dropped like Gramscian and stuff. I mean, that pretty much puts you, sort of high above. So we really appreciate it. I mean, you listeners, you can check out Jad Ghosn's videos and his talks on Instagram, on YouTube. I believe it's just his name, Jad Ghosn. His channel's there. He's also on Twitter. Super interesting, analysis. Most of it in Arabic, but I believe I've seen you branching out into English a little bit more. We're so happy to have had you on the show. We would love to have you back at some point.
Part 2.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Timour. Thanks a lot, Ben. It's been a pleasure to be hosted. Thanks.
I mean, yeah, these issues are not going away, so we can definitely have you back at some point in the future to finish the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jad, and we will be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Timour Azhari.
And I'm Jad Ghosn.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.